I inherited 47 acres of Colorado forest from my grandfather, Arthur Pierce, a man who treated land like an oath. He bought it in 1971 for $8,000 in cash, raised fences by hand, and recorded every tax payment in ledgers that smelled of pipe smoke and machine oil. When he died, he left me the property and one note folded inside the deed. Don't let the bastards take what's yours. For years, the land existed only as a memory, a quiet shape on a map, something I told myself I'd visit when life slowed down. It never did. Divorce, 2 kids in college, endless hours of work. All the things that shrink a person's world until there's no space left for silence. But every April, I paid the taxes, $6,400. Never late, never missed. 3 years passed before I drove there again. I expected to see the old fire road, the pines, maybe a few fallen logs after the storms. Instead, I saw pavement. 81 houses stood where the forest had been, arranged in precise geometry beneath a carved stone sign that read Summit Crest, a halberd luxury community. Streetlights buzzed where deer once crossed. Children rode bikes down driveways that traced my grandfather's survey lines. The forest was gone, replaced by symmetry and stucco. Shock hit first, then anger, slow and deliberate. I checked my GPS 4 times. Same coordinates, same land, my land. That night, I went home and cleared the kitchen table. I laid out everything my grandfather left me. The deed, the maps, the receipts, the note. The smell of age and tobacco still clung to the paper. It felt like holding history in both hands. I didn't shout or post online. I didn't confront anyone. I decided to fight differently, through precision, not emotion. I began documenting. I downloaded county maps, archived emails, printed parcel records. The next morning, I requested certified copies of my tax history from Boulder County. Each page came stamped and official, proof that the land had never been abandoned. By the end of the week, the shock had hardened into structure. I wasn't going to argue. I was going to prove. When I drove past Summit Crest again, the construction was complete. Landscaping trucks came and went, moving soil that no longer remembered its trees. People moved into $500,000 houses, unaware they stood on stolen ground. I didn't hate them. They were victims of convenience. But I hated the arrogance behind it. The belief that paperwork could rewrite ownership. That arrogance was about to meet a man who understood the fine print. My first instinct was to storm into court the next morning. Instead, I found someone who knew the rules better than I did. A property attorney named Nora Valdez, known for dismantling developers who thought they were untouchable. Her advice reshaped everything. The law was clear. Adverse possession in Colorado required 18 years of open, continuous use and payment of property taxes by the possessor. The halberd company met none of those conditions. My name had never left the county register. Legally, the land was still mine, but Nora explained the trap. If I tried to stop them immediately, it would collapse into chaos. Lawsuits from buyers, banks, and title companies. Years of legal warfare. Instead, she suggested something that sounded reckless at first. Let them finish. Wait until every home was built, every dollar spent, every lie complete. Then strike. She called it strategic patience. I called it controlled vengeance. So I waited. Each week I drove up from Denver, parking on the public road, filming the progress from afar. Cement mixers, electricians, landscapers, all logged in folders by date and coordinates. My phone filled with quiet evidence. Sometimes construction workers waved, thinking I was another inspector. No one suspected the man standing by the fence owned everything they were building. By autumn, all 81 homes were nearly finished. Signs advertised move-in specials, and families arrived with U-Hauls, carrying furniture and optimism into houses built on stolen ground. I watched a young couple plant a small maple tree in their front yard, almost the same size as the one I had planted years ago after my divorce. I felt no anger, only recognition, the cruel symmetry of hope and theft existing in the same breath. Once, I noticed Victoria Halberd watching me from her white SUV at the far end of the street, phone in hand, sunlight catching her jewelry. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's car idled behind mine, silent but heavy with meaning. I left before the warning turned into a citation. Through winter, I kept recording. I printed timestamps, organized photos, and built an archive that grew thicker by the week. Nora called it my insurance policy. I called it truth, written slowly in ink and patience. Every page brought me closer to the day when arrogance would meet evidence, and lose. By early winter, Summit Crest stood finished, a monument to arrogance. 81 identical houses gleamed beneath the snow, arranged with surgical precision where my grandfather's forest once breathed. The pines were gone, replaced by fences, streetlights, and motion sensors that blinked like nervous eyes. I drove past the gates twice a week, never crossing them, always filming from the shoulder of the road. My phone had become an archivist, storing quiet proof that a lie had taken physical shape. Every truck that passed, every delivery box, every splash of beige paint was another entry in the record of what they had stolen. By December, Victoria and Charles Halberd had tightened their control. Residents began receiving letters about acceptable wreath sizes and the proper hue of winter lights. Order presented itself as beauty, but I recognized the pattern instantly. In engineering, you hide pressure behind symmetry until the structure forgets it's strained. The Halberds had perfected that principle with people. When I tried to access the county registry to confirm my ownership, the portal locked me out. The screen read, "Ownership in dispute." No case had been filed. Someone had simply rewritten reality inside the system. A week later, county code enforcement called to investigate illegal dumping on my parcel. I drove there immediately, camera running. The land was immaculate, except for the 81 homes rooted where spruce and aspen once stood. The officer's boots crunched through snow as he surveyed the scene, finally shaking his head. Off the record, he told me the complaint had originated from Halberd Development LLC. It was a tactic, he said quietly, a bureaucratic trap to build a paper trail of violations before court could ever intervene. Their strategy wasn't chaos, it was erosion. That night, I sat at the kitchen table covered in maps, deeds, and tax receipts. The air smelled faintly of printer ink and coffee gone cold. I began listing every call, every false report, every timestamp. Paper doesn't panic, I reminded myself. Paper remembers. The more they tried to bury me in noise, the cleaner my record would become. In January, Nora Valdez joined me at that same table. She moved like a woman who had already survived a dozen corporate battles and learned that calm was sharper than anger. Her grey-streaked hair was pinned neatly, her glasses hanging from a silver chain that flashed when she leaned toward the documents. She read silently for nearly 10 minutes, then tapped one manicured finger on the LLC registration. "Delaware," she said at last. "Always Delaware. Shells inside shells." Together we followed the paper trail through county filings and scanned PDFs. There it was, Halberd Development LLC, financed by Summit Capital Partners. Each signature looped back to the same two people, Victoria Halberd and her husband Charles, both previously named in fraud suits quietly settled out of court. The pattern was almost mathematical: acquire neglected land, falsify possession claims, build fast, sell faster, and dissolve the company before consequences arrived. My acreage was simply their newest variable. The internet completed what paperwork began. Anonymous posts appeared on neighborhood forums accusing me of trespassing, harassing families, threatening children. A grainy photograph of my truck circulated with captions calling me a squatter and con artist. My name turned into rumor, then into threat. I stopped opening emails from strangers. Most contained nothing but bile. Still, I stayed quiet. Nora said silence was strategy, and strategy required patience. "Every word they write is evidence," she reminded me. She was right. The Halberds wanted a reaction, something to brand as hostility. But truth works slowly like frost, quiet, steady, irreversible. The forest was gone, but I had learned its lessons. Roots hold beneath the snow, unseen yet alive. I would do the same. The smear campaign burned faster than I imagined. By mid-January, social media was flooded with lies about me. Claims that I stalked residents, that I filmed children, that I threatened homeowners. Strangers shared my photo hundreds of times. My employer called me in for a meeting and placed me on temporary leave until things were resolved. Colleagues stopped replying to emails. Even friends began to avoid me. Reputation, I learned, dies quietly, not from truth, but from exhaustion. People don't question what's easy to believe. The Halberds had turned public opinion into their weapon, and I was their target. The cruelest part was that it worked. My daughter stopped answering calls for a week after someone sent her screenshots of the posts. My son, in another city, heard rumors at his job. The fire spread faster than any legal motion could. But fires, when left unattended, consume everything, even those who lit them. Nora moved with precision. She filed a defamation claim, secured a restraining order, and quietly began building a case that would make the Halberds regret every post. I gathered screenshots, URLs, timestamps. Every lie became evidence. Every threat became a nail in their own coffin. In February, something shifted. A whistleblower, a contractor who'd worked on the project, reached out through an encrypted email. He'd seen my online silence and decided I wasn't the villain the Halberds claimed. Attached were internal memos and payment logs proving what Nora had suspected. Summit Capital had known about my ownership since the beginning. There was even an email exchange between Charles and Victoria, acknowledging the risk but calculating that I wouldn't fight back. That single file changed everything. When I printed it, my hands trembled. The ink bled slightly under the desk lamp, the words clear as a confession. They had built 81 houses on land they knew wasn't theirs. They hadn't made a mistake. They'd made a bet that an ordinary man wouldn't have the money, the endurance, or the courage to challenge them. The whistleblower's documents turned my quiet patience into a loaded weapon. Nora called it Phase 2. She began preparing for court, drafting motions and subpoenas, moving from defense to offense. The Halberds responded with panic disguised as confidence. They sent legal letters threatening countersuits, hired private investigators to verify my background, and leaked false tax records to the press. But the more they fought, the more evidence surfaced. Bank transfers, forged signatures, bribed inspectors. Every layer peeled back another crime. By March, I no longer felt like a victim. The fear had burned away, replaced by something colder and steadier. The truth had gravity now, and it was pulling everything toward reckoning. The storm that had been gathering for months was finally ready to break. By February, silence had become a discipline. I worked methodically, collecting evidence the way I used to collect data on construction sites. Every measurement exact, every anomaly logged. The Halberds were expanding fast, hosting ribbon cuttings, advertising luxury mountain living on billboards that still stood on my soil. Families posed for photos in driveways they didn't know were stolen. I watched from the shoulder of the highway, the wind cutting across the valley, my camera steady in gloved hands. At home, the table had become a command center. Old ledgers from my grandfather lay beside fresh printouts, survey maps layered with red annotations. Nora Valdez sat across from me most evenings, a blue legal pad balanced on one knee. She had the stillness of someone who had already seen the worst in people and learned not to flinch. Her voice stayed low, deliberate. "We'll let them finish," she said once, tracing a neat circle around the final parcel on the map. "If we stop construction now, chaos wins. If we wait, they'll bury themselves under their own signatures." It went against instinct, but I trusted her precision. I had spent years designing frameworks strong enough to bear stress. Now I was part of one. Our plan depended on patience. Let them build the last house. Let them sell. Let them boast. Every sale would multiply the evidence of fraud. When the time came, the collapse would echo louder because they had built it themselves. During the days, I documented, my truck logs filled with dates, weather notes, vehicle counts. At night, Nora cross-checked filings, uncovering the quiet corruption threaded through the project. A $45,000 consulting payment to a county official. Permit reviews approved in half the usual time. Political donations timed within days of zoning meetings. Each line was another beam in the scaffolding of deceit. When exhaustion crept in, I reread my grandfather's note. Don't let them take what's yours. It wasn't anger anymore, it was mathematics. For every false signature, I had 3 authentic ones. For every accusation online, a document stamped with the truth. Nora encouraged this discipline. Precision is power, she said. Emotion is what they weaponize. The first major crack appeared when the county sent me a duplicate tax bill. It listed my property as non-existent, the parcel absorbed into a subdivision. The attempt was clumsy, desperate. Nora handled it with surgical calm, forwarding the receipts of my annual payments straight to the assessor's office, copying the State Revenue Department, and filing a certified inquiry. "Let's see who panics first," she murmured. Within a week, the error was corrected and the clerk reassigned. The halberds responded by tightening the noose. New letters arrived accusing me of trespass, defamation, interfering with business operations. I archived them all. Nora smiled when I showed her the pile. Perfect. Every threat is a confession. She organized the documents by date, her handwriting small and exact, as if drafting blueprints for justice. Outside, winter began to fade. The snow melted from rooftops, revealing the sterile geometry of identical homes. From the ridge above the development, I could see the reflection of sunlight off 81 roofs, each one a mirror of the same lie. The air smelled faintly of thawing earth and concrete dust. I realized then what Nora had understood from the beginning. This was never only about reclaiming land. It was about designing consequence. She was the architect now, building a case like a structure that would stand after everything false had collapsed. And I was the engineer, following the blueprint she drew with calm hands. Justice, I was learning, is built the same way as bridges, quietly, one calculation at a time. Spring arrived early that year, turning the construction dust into a pale haze that never settled. From the ridge, the 81 houses looked complete, identical shells of prosperity resting on stolen ground. I knew that inside those walls, people were hanging curtains, painting nurseries, believing they had arrived somewhere permanent. The halberds paraded the neighborhood on social media, standing before stone facades with champagne glasses and captions about community and legacy. Every post was another nail in their coffin. By March, Nora Valdez had transformed my kitchen into a legal command post. The walls were pinned with flowcharts and printed emails, each connection drawn in red pencil. She worked with an elegance that made strategy feel like art. Coffee in one hand, pen in the other, eyes sharp behind reading glasses. "Patterns tell stories," she said once, barely above a whisper. "Ours says intent." Her calm terrified me more than anger ever could. The first depositions began with the title company. Nora handled them personally, her tone polite but surgical. The representatives from Summit Capital looked confident when they arrived, carrying sleek laptops and brittle smiles. 2 hours later, they left pale, their signatures on a sworn statement admitting to a $45,000 transfer labeled expedited processing. The phrase itself sounded harmless, but in context, it was a confession. The trail of money led straight back to the halberds. I recorded every moment in my notebook, the way I used to document bridge stress tests, details first, feelings later. Still, there were nights when the pressure hummed under my skin. Anonymous messages appeared in my inbox. "You're ruining good families. You'll regret this." Someone left a dead crow on my driveway, wings stiff in the morning frost. I took photos, sealed the bird in a bag, logged the time and temperature, and sent it to Nora. She didn't flinch. "Fear is a tool," she said. "They're using it badly." April brought escalation. The halberds' lawyers filed motions accusing me of harassment, trespass, defamation, noise meant to exhaust us before trial. Nora counted each one, stacking their paperwork like dominoes ready to fall. When fatigue blurred my focus, she reminded me why precision mattered. They thrive on chaos. We build on sequence. Then came the audit notice from the IRS. A familiar tactic, anonymous complaint, automatic review. My stomach twisted when I opened the envelope. Nora read it, exhaled slowly, and reached for her phone. "It's Apex Investigations," she said. "They're the halberds' private firm. This crosses into criminal interference." Within hours, she filed a motion linking the audit and the harassment. The next morning, a federal clerk requested documentation. The tide had started to turn. But victory never comes clean. The more progress we made, the uglier their desperation became. Local gossip pages flooded with new accusations. that I'd faked documents, that I was under investigation, that Nora was milking an old man for fees. It was almost funny, if you ignored the fact that people believed it. My clients at work stopped calling. One contract was temporarily suspended. I sat in the quiet hum of my empty office and understood what Nora had warned me about from the start. They weren't just stealing property, they were trying to erase identity. One evening she arrived with takeout and a thin smile. "They're unraveling," she said, spreading files across the table. "The more they push, the more they prove intent. Let them." She handed me a folder, copies of internal emails from Summit Capital, obtained through subpoena. In one of them, Victoria Halberd had written, "Flint property issue contained. Proceed with marketing. Taxes unpaid." Nora tapped the line with her pen. "That's perjury and fraud in one sentence." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains, shaking the windows. I watched the storm gather and thought of fault lines under pressure, invisible until they break. We were close now, the structure creaking before collapse. Nora closed her notebook and met my eyes. "Next phase," she said. "Depositions for the Halberds. They think they're untouchable. Let's remind them gravity applies to everyone." I nodded, feeling something I hadn't in months. Momentum, the kind that comes not from anger, but from the steady alignment of truth. The storm was here, and for the first time, it was on our side. The conference room sat high above downtown Denver, all glass and light, as if transparency could disguise corruption. The mountains shimmered in the distance, unbothered, while inside tension had the weight of stone. Preston and Victoria Halberd arrived first, dressed like victory itself. Grey suit, cream blazer, practiced smiles. Their lawyer followed with a briefcase that looked heavier than his conscience. Nora Valdez sat beside me, calm as an architect before demolition. The court reporter's machine clicked like rain on a tin roof as the oath was given. Nora began softly, the way a sculptor touches clay before striking form. "State your name and position." Preston answered smoothly. "Preston Halberd, managing partner, Summit Capital Partners." The first questions were simple: dates, titles, signatures, until she reached the February 18th email. She slid the printed copy across the table. "Do you recognize this document?" He hesitated a fraction too long. "I do." "Did you write it?" "Yes." "Then confirm for the record that, as of February 18th, you knew the land in question was owned by Nolan Pierce." His attorney objected, voice tight, but Nora's tone didn't change. "Objection noted. Please answer." Preston's jaw shifted, the confidence thinning from his voice. "Our title team believed the property was abandoned." Nora leaned forward, glasses catching the overhead light. "Belief is not fact, Mr. Halberd. You wrote, and I quote, 'Pierce continues paying taxes. Adverse claim will fail if challenged.'" The silence that followed felt like a slow exhale from the building itself. By the time she finished, his tie was crooked and sweat had darkened his collar. 2 hours later, Victoria took the chair. She crossed her legs, composure carved from vanity, but her fingers trembled as she adjusted her bracelet. Nora's questions were surgical. Contracts, emails, donation records to county officials. Victoria tried charm. It died fast under precision. "Who approved the $45,000 consulting fee to the zoning clerk?" A pause. "I did." "Was it disclosed to the board?" "No." "So it was a bribe?" The word hung in the air like smoke. The court reporter typed every syllable. The sound became a kind of heartbeat, steady, irreversible. When Nora finally said, "No further questions," it felt less like an ending than an aftershock. Outside the building, the wind carried grit across the parking lot. I leaned against the hood of my truck, lungs tight. Nora joined me, tucking her notes into a leather case. "They cracked," she said simply. "They don't know it yet, but it's over." I wanted to believe her. But experience taught me that people like the Halberds didn't collapse quietly. They detonated. That night, my son Tyler called. A stranger had visited his restaurant, flashing credentials from a private investigation firm, asking if his father had ever been unstable. Tyler's voice shook as he spoke. I took notes, then called Nora. She didn't sound surprised. "Classic intimidation. They're testing how far you'll bend. Don't." The following week, an IRS letter arrived. Another complaint, another ghost. Nora moved faster than I could panic. She filed motions linking the harassment to Summit Capital's counsel, citing witness tampering. The tone in her emails had changed. still calm, but sharpened, distilled. "They're running out of tools," she wrote. "When money fails, fear is all that's left." And she was right. By April, their fear had a rhythm. A local gossip blog posted that I was under criminal investigation. A false zoning report surfaced, claiming structural damage to houses in Summit Crest. The Halberds had turned defense into chaos, flooding the public record to drown the truth. But Nora taught me the only countermeasure that worked: consistency. We stayed the course, every filing perfect, every motion timed to precision. The day of the second deposition, Nora wore a navy suit that reflected no light. She moved through the hallway like a general who already knew the outcome. When Victoria saw her, she froze, whispering something to her husband. Nora didn't even look their way. "They're not our problem anymore," she murmured. "The court is." For the first time in months, I believed her. The story broke before dawn. A Denver news site published an anonymous leak. Internal documents, emails, contracts. The headline read, "Luxury developers sold homes on disputed land." Within hours, my phone began vibrating non-stop. Homeowners called, terrified. Brokers panicked. Some wanted reassurance. Others demanded explanations I wasn't ready to give. I sat at my desk, watching the sun rise behind the mountains, red light spilling over snow like a warning flare. By mid-morning, it was everywhere. Television anchors repeated my name. They called me a whistleblower, a claimant, a symbol. None of those words felt true. I wasn't trying to be anything except accurate. But accuracy has a cost. My employer put me on leave, pending clarification. Friends stopped returning calls. The Halberds had spent months painting me as a villain. Now the same story made me a headline. Both versions were wrong. Nora Valdez called at noon, her voice steady amid the chaos. "It's starting," she said. "We didn't leak it, but whoever did just did us a favor. Now the court of public opinion has eyes on them." She arrived that evening, trenchcoat dusted with snow, a calm storm in human form. She spread out a folder across my table, financial transfers, sworn statements, the digital trail of the Halberds' empire. "They'll deny everything until the last possible second," she said. "Then they'll look for an exit. Our job is to make sure every door locks behind them." The following days moved like a slow avalanche. Investors began withdrawing. Contractors demanded overdue payments. Employees from Summit Capital leaked more evidence. Emails confirming bribes, falsified inspections, forged signatures. Nora spent hours cross-referencing each file, her precision almost meditative. "This is how truth surfaces," she murmured. "Layer by layer until the lie can't breathe." But exposure came with retaliation. A black SUV appeared near my driveway, engine idling at night. Once, I came home to find my front door half open. Nothing was taken, but the message was clear. Nora arranged for police reports, security cameras, even a temporary restraining order. "They're scared," she said, eyes narrowing. "Fear makes people reckless. That's good for us." The first court date was set for early February. In the weeks before it, Nora prepared me like an athlete before a championship. Practice questions, evidence drills, composure under pressure. "They'll try to provoke you," she warned. "They'll make you the story. Don't give them that gift." I tried. But one night, scrolling through social media, I saw a photo of my daughter Emma shared by someone claiming she was the daughter of a fraud. My chest went cold. I called Nora, voice shaking. She didn't tell me to calm down. She simply said, "I'll handle it." The next morning, the post was gone, the account deleted. The morning of the hearing, the air was brittle and bright. I stood outside the courthouse, watching my breath form and disappear. Nora joined me, her hair pinned tight, her expression unreadable. "Remember," she said quietly, "we're not fighting for revenge. We're fighting for record. What we build here will outlast them." For the first time, I believed that could be true. The courthouse smelled of waxed floors and coffee gone stale. Room 3C overflowed with people, reporters, homeowners, spectators who had turned our conflict into a local spectacle. At the front sat Judge Angela Ramirez, a woman whose eyes could quiet a room faster than a gavel. The Halberds occupied the defense table, their lawyers whispering like stage actors awaiting cues. Nora sat beside me, posture perfect, voice low. "We've already won," she said. "We just need them to realize it." Her opening statement cut through the room like wire through glass. "This is not a story about confusion," she began. "It is a story about theft disguised as business." She unfolded the evidence. Land deeds, tax receipts, the February 18th email, the bribes, the false filings. Each exhibit landed like a hammer strike. The defendants didn't just take property, she continued. They took trust. They turned law into leverage. Preston Halberd's lawyer tried to argue administrative error. Nora countered with receipts, timestamps, signatures. Every move had a counterweight. Every excuse a document waiting. When Victoria took the stand, she crumbled within 15 minutes. Nora's tone never changed. Calm, relentless, inevitable. Watching her dismantle years of deceit was like watching architecture undone. One beam removed, then another, until the roof caved in silently. When the judge called a recess, Nora leaned back in her chair, breathing evenly. "They'll settle," she whispered. "They have no structure left to stand on." She was right. That afternoon, the defense requested a closed meeting. Behind glass doors, their lawyers offered what they called a mutual resolution. Nora rejected it. "You don't get to buy silence," she said, her voice soft but final. The next morning, the judge delivered her ruling. I stood while the words washed over me. Fraudulent transfer of property, malicious defamation, intentional interference. Nora's work had woven it all together, and now it held. The court awarded full ownership of the 47 acres to me, plus damages and legal fees. The Halberds faced federal investigation. For the first time in years, I exhaled without fear. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions, but their noise felt distant. Nora stood beside me on the courthouse steps, snow drifting between us. "It's over," I said, though my voice barely carried. "Not yet," she replied. "Justice doesn't end with a verdict. It ends when you decide what to do with it." I looked at the crowd, at the homeowners, families who had bought homes in good faith, now afraid of losing them. I realized what she meant. Ownership wasn't victory. Restoration was. The mountains loomed behind the city, steady, eternal. For the first time since my grandfather's death, I felt something close to peace. Spring came late that year. Snow lingered in the shadows, melting into the soil that had once been disputed, poisoned, and fought over. I built a small cabin on the North Ridge, just 2 rooms, a desk, and a window facing the mountains. From there, I could see the new community below. The houses glowed in morning light, alive with sound, laughter, dogs, children. Life had returned to the land, and this time, it belonged to those who would care for it. The Walter Pierce Memorial Scholarship launched that April. 1 scholarship each year, $10,000 for a Colorado student studying engineering or environmental science. My daughter Ava helped design the program website. My son Ethan handled applications. It felt like closure. Not the end of a fight, but the beginning of something clean. Occasionally, I still received letters. One from a retired teacher who said her home had been the first she'd ever owned. Another from a young family who'd planted a tree in their backyard, naming it Walter. They sent a photo, sunlight caught in green leaves, a child smiling beneath them. I visited that spot once, the backyard of Lot 42. The tree was small but strong. Its roots had already begun to hold the earth in place. I stood there for a while, listening to wind, the same sound my grandfather once heard when this land was still wild. The Halberds were gone, bankrupt, disgraced, their empire dissolved into court records and debt. But I didn't think of them anymore. Revenge had burned out long ago. What remained was balance. Each evening, when the sun sank behind the mountains, I felt that balance settle inside me. The land was whole again, not because I owned it, but because I had returned it to purpose. Sometimes, justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration, and sometimes the best way to win isn't to take everything back, but to give it all away.